So good afternoon. Thank you for coming on this absolutely glorious day. I know you could be out promenading or maybe even having happy hour. I know it's definitely happy hour in Spain where I live by now. But we have an exciting topic to discuss, so I'm glad that you decided to join us. So achieving ROI through workforce learning is the name of the game today. And honestly, it really is an evergreen topic. It's maybe even a grown topic. When we were prepping for the session, Darren, you mentioned, I've been coming here for years, and I think this is a topic that's on the agenda every single time I come. We keep on talking about it. How to get a return on an investment from workplace learning. Is it possible? Has anything actually changed? Has there been a shift? What do you think, Darren?
So if there's been a shift, I think that the shift is this realization that we keep on asking ourselves this question, and Gautam and I were on the same panel, like literally the same panel with the same exact topic a year ago today. I think that there's a realization that a lot of times we desperately as an industry wish that this was a measurement problem. If only we could measure all of the learning that's actually happening on our platforms, then finally people would understand and maybe pay for the learning that we're selling. And I think there's a growing realization that this may not be a measurement problem as much as it's actually a value delivery problem. And if I think back over the last 10 years of learning, maybe even 15, as an industry, and some of my history as well has been spent solving some of the content problem in learning. Hey, in order to learn, we need to have the right courses, we need to have the access to the right information, we need some way to have learning videos, access to learning videos. And our thought was, well, that's going to solve the problem. But it didn't. So about 2016, 2017, a clever group of people got together and said, you know what? With all this content, the world's awash in content, what we really need is Netflix, right? Anybody remember Netflix of learning? Has anybody here heard that? I see a few hands go up. Everybody talked about how do we create the Netflix of learning. I think the thing that is most different now, Amanda, is the difference is there's a realization that watching, observing, that somehow having a Netflix-like interface into all the content in the world is not going to deliver the ROI that we're all looking for, and that a new approach is necessary.
So maybe content is not quite king? Is that what you're saying, Darren?
Maybe not. Maybe not.
Maybe not. I always say a spray and pray approach to content, the smorgasbord, all this promise, right, of throwing content at the problem, maybe that isn't the solution. So having said that, I work advising global 500 organizations, 1,000 organizations around the world on their ed tech strategies, on their digital learning transformation. And I work as well with lots of providers of the ed tech that are trying to help solve the same problem, and investors too. And in my experience, most L&D organizations, they're still using metrics. And I know we're still talking about measurement, but that's part of the problem, right? They're using metrics like course completions, like MAUs and WOWs, maybe NPS scores, things like that. Hours of learning, we need more hours of learning. So what I would refer to as kind of vanity metrics versus metrics that matter. So why do you think that is? I'm going to throw this over to you, Christina. I know you've got some strong thoughts about it.
Yes, I certainly do. I think what's happening is that we're failing to connect the dots and make use of what we have in front of us. Yes, there are a lot of vanity metrics out there, but I don't think it's a simple black and white issue where some things matter and others don't. I think we can scaffold our way up to real ROI by building a story from the ground up. I'm a big fan of using frameworks. My favorite is the ROI Institute's methodology, and it's got 5 different levels. I'll cover some of the highlights here and show how I think simple logic can help us solve the problem. So the first level is all about learner reactions to the learning. So this is about feelings and intentions and attitudes around learning. And though this may seem fuzzy and intangible, like why are we even talking about this, it really matters when we're talking about human skills, power skills. Here at NovoEd, we talk a lot about moving from context to courageous action, about the impact of transitioning from unconscious incompetence to conscious competence, and what that means at the individual level, at the team level, and at the organizational level. So for the individual, that can mean greater self-efficacy, problem resolution, ownership. At the organizational level, that can mean moving into greater social consciousness and having awareness of inequitable power structures and the courage to actually do something about it. There's a growing body of research out there about metacognition, about awareness as a form of knowledge in itself. So these are things I think that we can start to measure and quantify and even push ourselves to assign a dollar value to, even if we can't immediately. And then the second level is all about learning itself. So there's this concept out there called place of proof. It's all about creating a mechanism, whether that's a virtual reality simulation or a multiple choice assessment, that forces you to reveal something about your state of knowledge. And if we can really do that, and by the way, we can, think about what that means for compliance, for risk avoidance, for time to revenue generation, especially if we're talking about employees with dollar amounts attached to their time. And then it becomes a question of application. Can we successfully apply what we learned to the job? And most of us stop here, but we can answer that question with 360-degree surveys of our managers, our peers, and our direct reports. And then it becomes a question of impact. Can we isolate and calculate the impact of that applied knowledge on the metrics that matter to the business? And though this may seem really difficult, there's all this rich data at the enterprise level that exists around the metrics that matter. So for example, if we're a supply chain, we know what every percentage point of breakage means for the bottom line. If we are HR, we know the dollar value of turnover. If we are customer service, we know what every uptick in NPS score means for revenue. So I think it's a matter of connecting the dots, and I think we can use simple logic to solve the problem. And I think it's a matter of staying with the problem every step along the way and having the focus and the patience to do so.
Wow, I don't know about you, but I'm inspired. That was great. I also love the concept of scaffolding and building the foundations, right? When it comes to ROI, often what I see is the baseline isn't measured to begin with. So if we don't know what our starting point is, then how can we even hope to show that we've improved, even if we have, right? So another question, clearly, L&D, it's this evergreen problem. They're still struggling when it comes to show ROI. So what do you think is keeping L&D from doing things better, from making changes, from maybe looking at some of those metrics that matter that Christina was just outlining a moment ago? Things that really have a connection to performance, both individual performance as well as organizational performance. And maybe call me an optimist, I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive, right? Because if what's good for me as an employee is going to make me more promotable or give me a raise, stay relevant in the workforce, it might also be aligned with the company's goals. So this is a bit of a controversial word that I'm going to use, but who is to blame? Who is to blame for this? Who's to blame for not doing a better job? What do you think?
You see all of us studiously avoiding eye contact right now.
So everyone's looking away. And it's actually maybe it's a good moment or not. I'm not sure. I was going to ask in the crowd, how many of you are actually L&D practitioners in the workforce? 1, 2. Doesn't seem to be a lot at this conference, but okay. Maybe after that question, after that comment, no one wants to admit it, right? What about EdTech providers and vendors? A good showing, yes. Any investors out there at all? Okay, all right, just so we know who we're talking to. Great. So I'll throw the question to you. So who do you think is to blame for not getting this right year upon year? We're having the same conversation.
Well, as an
Darren.
entrepreneur, I always like to blame investors, so let me start.
Well, and investors as well. Do they have a role?
But no, I think that, jokes aside, and first of all, thank you all for showing up. Instead of happy hour, you chose this, which is a choice that I don't really understand, but thank you anyway. And I'm usually end up on the Wednesday afternoon panel, so this is an upgrade. I think I prefer the word who's responsible than blame. And I would say it's everyone. And that's not a cop-out. I think there's no systemic incentive to do anything but to measure DAUs and MAUs. And what's happened is corporate learning has sort of sat, for the most part, in L&D. And a lot of it has been sort of seen as a cost center versus an opportunity to actually generate more profits for the organization. And when something gets seen as a cost center, it's sort of natural to say, okay, it's a lot of L&D, and I think the forward-looking people, which I imagine are the L&D people in this room, the forward-looking people, I think, do it differently, but the vast majority of L&D professionals are checking boxes and saying, I got something for the entire organization, and that checks the box. And guess what? Most of the providers have no incentive to do anything different because you know what? I was able to make my sale, and everybody watched the video. It's great, right? I think that's about to change. And I think it's about to change because with everything that's happened in the last 2 years, and we are in the tightest talent market that we've ever seen, I think in my lifetime anyway, and probably a century, right? Talent and learning and reskilling and upskilling have become CEO topics, not just topics that are discussed in one part of the organization. And as that happens, there's going to be a natural movement to say, both to invest more and then to demand more return on that investment. Right? And I think we're at a moment in time where that's about to change. But I wouldn't go so far as to say people have been in cahoots. I don't think it's sort of, and that's why I don't like the word blame, because it's not, I don't think there's like malintent, right? But I think just defaults matter, and nobody has an incentive, and then inertia just keeps you where you are. And that's about to change.
I also have a different observation, and it kind of relates to Christina, to the point that you just made about measuring the metrics that matter as they relate to the business case. It seems to me that the industry practitioners focus on a set of metrics that are going to be able to measure ROI for everything. And it's never going to be the case. And one never should try to measure the ROI of everything that we do, just like people in other functions outside of learning never do the same thing. In fact, we actually had our customer advisor board come together, and here we're talking about companies like Thomson Reuters, Bank of New York, Cisco, Walmart, really, really big companies. And they were talking about how do they think about measuring and managing skills internally, really the question that is the question of the day for talent acquisition, talent development. And many of them found that when they had tried to create a universal approach where we want to measure all the skills and all the roles across our entire organization, it would drive their organizations to a halt. And so I almost wonder if being more intentional, more specific, more focused on where do we actually need from the company point of view, where do we need to see ROI? And then let's go deep on how do we actually measure ROI, because we know it really matters to the organization. Then we can measure it, then we know it right there. But if you try to measure the ROI of every single hour everybody in my organization might ever spend in learning, you're going to get to the same place that our customer advisory board did when they tried to do everything at the same time, which is nowhere.
You know, you make a really good point, Darren, and I see this again and again. We're kind of swinging from maybe not measuring anything to all of a sudden it's data, 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 and we have to measure everything. But then it's about boiling the ocean, right? And you're never going to get that done. And so by the time you do that, it's, you know, the business problems have moved on. So where would you recommend that companies start? You talked about being intentional.
So I think one of the things that we've seen our customers do best is partner with those organizations that are most critical to the company, and at the same time where the skills are least apparent in the org. And so in our organization, we typically see this with data professionals, cloud engineering. Those are the areas where, to the point of this being a really, really, really hard talent market to hire for, those are the areas where the skills are the least. You partner with the leaders there, you get an understanding of what's going on in the organization, what skills are deficient, what do you need in order to hit your goals, then your ROI is right there.
And not only that, but it might be easier to build that business case and get the investment you need to do L&D right, don't you think? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to be controversial again a bit, and I'm going to throw this one over to you, Luke, so be prepared. So according to one study, and it's not a new study, it was actually done in, I think, 2016 by Harvard Business School. It's called the Great Training Robbery. I don't know if anyone's heard of it in the audience. But basically, what they did is they looked at lots of different, corporate workplace learning organizations and situations, and they found that U.S. corporations alone were spending $162 billion. And that number has grown exponentially in the last 10 years, right? Especially with the pandemic and all the investment in technology. Now, what they found, however, and this is the reason for the title, was that they just weren't getting the ROI that they had expected. So the conclusion is, are senior executives and their HR teams, are they complicit in robbing the organization because they're not really getting anything in return? So no, it's particularly hard to demonstrate ROI, and in this case, they were really brutal when it came to leadership development. And still today, in most of the orgs that I know, a lot of money is being spent on leadership development, to the detriment sometimes of the broader workforce. So I know you work for an organization that does a lot of great work with leadership development. So what do you think about this? Do you think we're wasting money, or how can we do a better job of connecting the investment in leadership development and other soft skills as well to return on investment?
Definitely. Yeah, as an HBS grad myself, I would also say don't trust anything out of HBS. Right? What are they saying? But yeah, in leadership development, and I come at this from the place of, I hate to tell you this, Jennie, but I worked at McKinsey Academy for 3 years before this, and I work now at Abilitie, where we do leadership development programs. And as I was reading that article, I was thinking just how far things have come in the last 6 years. You know, that article is from 2016, and if I look at what's happening at the consulting firms, if I look at what's happening with us, things have changed. And it's a little bit of a different frame than you guys have been giving, where you're talking a very skill-based frame. Right, you're saying, hey, how do I measure the skills that my workforce has? What I see in leadership development is a push to measure even other things outside of skills. So I see a push in the measurement side. I see a push beyond just skills to the community and the network that gets created, and then organizations really recognizing the importance of leadership development programs for culture. And at McKinsey, we had something called the Organizational Health Index. I'm guessing you have something similar, Jennie. But really understanding the instrumental things on the way that need to change to make long-term change in an organization. And I think one is that metric has really revolutionized in the last 6 years. Two is I think people have realized that that metric alone isn't what needs to happen, but all the things happening around leadership development are really important. The scaffolding around it, the organizational change that's occurring. And you see our clients, for sure, doing much more leadership development around change that people have to make, and so that when they're measuring the behaviors that you're saying, Christina, they're actually leading to business value, right? And so we see that a lot with our clients. And we see that with the change in mindset from, hey, this is now a CEO thing, right? Tomorrow I'm going to go to a client, I'm going to drive up to LA. I only get one day here, sadly. I'm going to drive up to LA and I'm going to meet with the CEO for the leadership development program that we're doing. And he's going to kick off for the first 2 hours. And he's going to talk about the strategy that they are doing and why the program that we're doing prepares the executives to do that. And so if I look at where this is going, right, I see it as a real evolution of the metrics, evolution and real thoughtfulness about what are the instrumental metrics that matter, not on a skill level, but on a higher level. Secondly, in terms of really tying programs to change, and that's even easier in a virtual world. We see that for the last 2 years, as people are like, wow, I can have my executives from all over the world come together for a program over 12 weeks, as opposed to the historical 2 days in person. And then third is, I do think the technology has really improved. We're a simulation-based programs company that does extended programs where people actually get put in the situation they're trying to learn to be, whether it's executives, whether it's managers, whatever it is in the leadership development. And because of that, we can actually watch the different levels of Kirkpatrick that you're layering out. We're saying, hey, this is how you actually showed up. And so I think that there's been a change in technology that goes on top of even the change in measurement and the change in recognizing that L&D alone doesn't do it. It has to be integrated into organizational change. And so I do think that that's a big difference from 2016.
Yeah, you make a lot of great points. I think another question is, and I think we have a responsibility, the community, the vendors, the investors, and the practitioners as well, to be really honest about what problems can actually be solved with learning and with technology. And when it comes to leadership, I have no doubt that there's great leadership development programs out there and also that can be measured when it comes to the ROI. But other times, you know, is it a culture problem? Is it a structural problem as well? And not just with leadership development, but with all kinds of training. So maybe in order to be able to demonstrate ROI, first we have to know whether or not it truly is a problem that we can even solve to begin with. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that remark. Darren. You're staring at me.
I'm getting a reputation. I'm just listening to a really well-run panel. I'm taking notes right now.
Oh, great. Jennie.
Yeah, no, I think just building on all the points that's made, I think how Bain Academy approaches learning, actually, we've historically have been in the fortunate place for we're typically embedded into the Bain solutions that we serve to our clients. So usually, actually, we start with the business outcome. We actually don't start with here's the things you want to learn, right? We start with, for example, let's say you're in a cost transformation. You're trying to reduce costs by $500 million. So what are the different ways that you could have your workforce to help you achieve that? And then from then, we design the learning experiences that enables the workforce, top to bottom, to deliver on that. So in some ways, kind of like the ROI calculation is built into why a client would buy the Bain product. Because in some ways, like if the client doesn't achieve the savings, like we don't get paid. So we're very much like incented to make sure using any method that we need to make sure the learning is achieved, that people grow there, and that they're able to deliver the results. So in our experiences, in the last few years, that's primarily the method by which we prove the ROI of our learning. So I'm so excited to be here in this conference because it's actually the first year that Bain's participated. We are really much interested in some of the more scalable solutions, because clearly what our historic, like our traditional methods of doing that, right? It's very labor intensive, it's very high touch, it's very effective, but we are very curious about what are the technologies that are available to help scale this to be equally personal, high impact, and also measurable. And I'm learning so much from everyone that I'm meeting today, from everyone that I'm listening on the panel. But for like leadership program, we actually have our proprietary leadership development model called inspirational leadership. And how we typically measure that, and exactly to the point, it's what Darren was saying, it's like you can't measure everything all the time. Selective metrics. So for example, for a given leader, we're saying this year you're gonna work on listening skill. So we do 360 input basically for this individual at the start of a program, and then at the end of that program, we only measure that metric, let's say after a year. So is it labor intensive? Absolutely. Is it done digitally? Yes, but someone still needs to collate the data, gather it, read it, and understand it. So I think this is actually one of those things where leadership skills, I think in my mind, it's a little bit like parenting skills. It's kind of like, you don't know whether your kid is going to be honest, hardworking, until maybe they're like teenagers, right? But you have to have done years and years of the micro moments to actually get to some of those, what I call non-tangible skills.
Here I was feeling so optimistic, but I left 2 teenagers at home, and that is not a great analogy. Well, I think as well, just listening to all of you talk, it's so important, what are the questions that we're asking, right, to begin with? And so often I see with the clients that I work with, it's throwing solutions at the problem. And maybe it's, even the senior leadership, they come and they say, listen, we need coaching, we need leadership, or whatever it is. Well, why do you need coaching? What is the business problem that you're trying to solve for to begin with? What is the business strategy? And I have this habit when I go in, work with Novartis and HSBC and big companies like that, and invariably I'll say, what is your business strategy? Bring that to the table. Let's have a look. And they show me their learning strategy, right? They show me, and a learning strategy is not a business strategy, right? And so especially the majority of ed tech vendors in the room, can we help our clients to really ask the right questions? What's important to the business? Then hook it to that. Hook it to that and focus. Like you were saying, Darren, we don't need to measure necessarily everything, but if there are critical skills gaps, for example, can we connect our initiatives to that and then expand, from there? So I always say, if we don't make money for the business, if we don't save money for the business or mitigate risk, maybe we should start over again, right? I'm a banker's daughter. It's just, it's a handicap. But really, this is workforce learning. It's not a charity. And if we can't do a good job of articulating that to begin with, how can we even, imagine that demonstrating ROI is going to be possible? So having said that, L&D struggles, right? And I don't know how many of you have heard, but in December, TikTok, or actually their parent company, I think it's called ByteDance. So they laid off the entire L&D team in a 5-minute town hall meeting. And what they said was that the value of the programs, the training that team, 100 people, was offering to this organization, it was questionable and limited. And it wasn't connected to their business challenges at all. And so they literally just eliminated the whole department. And so I'm wondering, does this signal a trend, right? Is L&D as we know it, is it at risk of extinction? if we don't get our act together with demonstrating ROI. What do you think, Jennie?
I think, so I also read that article, and I'm in complete agreement of that business decision, because if you read all the details, right, the feedback was, well, this department was in charge of delivering mediocre training, like a talk that is streamed to 1,000 people. So it's probably not the best use of both the L&D group's time, but also the audience that's having to listen to this. So we found that I think a lot of the traditional L&D department, as it's originally designed, probably is not going to last very long, right? Just given the general desire for higher impact learning. So we actually do see in our clients, and to a lot of you talk about now this is becoming the CEO agenda. Capability building and reskilling certainly is a high topic, top of all the C-level executives list, but how it actually gets delivered, I think that is where the change is that we're seeing. So we believe in, for example, a lot of the learning has to be delivered by people who are practitioners. So for example, when we deliver our procurement university training, right, it's a combination of people who's done procurement, but also people who's done learning design, so that in that combination, that's when you have people who truly understand the business problem, can speak that language. So you're basically reducing the cognitive load for the learner to have to translate from concept to the things that we have to do. So one of the things that Bain Academy, we strongly believe in a train-to-trainer model. So we don't believe in hiring a bunch of professional trainers. We actually believe in giving practitioners the skills to actually be better teachers. So one of the programs that we have almost for all of our learning program is a train-to-trainer feature where the companies themselves, whether it's executives or the procurement manager, they could actually learn the skills to be better teachers. So that is a much better ROI than kind of in abstract, trying to get people to teach conceptual frameworks, whether it's through video. So that's what we've been kind of working towards. So the ByteDance TikTok example, I think that's a good business decision, especially knowing some of the details of that department. And we also believe, the traditional L&D department, it's very difficult to prove business value if it's a cost center, as some of you guys have talked about.
I would even add to that and say that when we reflect back on this moment 5 or 10 years from now, I think we'll look at this moment really sort of post-COVID, post-pandemic, hopefully, knock on wood, learning as being the dividing point, almost a new golden age for L&D. That's a new golden age for those willing to embrace it. But if you think about what whether we're vendors, investors, whether we're practitioners, what we have in front of us, to a certain extent, we'll call it the boring parts of our jobs, where kind of the basic block and tackling skill enablement, we can now find solutions pretty easily that will cover those pieces. Mm-hmm. Now we can be strategic consultants, by we I mean the practitioners, strategic consultants to the organization, and think about what divides companies that succeed in the global economy from those who don't. It's not factories, it's not capital, it's not office buildings, it's the people that you have in the building, both the people that you can recruit, and we know everybody wants to be developed, but more importantly, the people that you can bring from A to B, from 1 to 4, from senior manager to vice president. That's what's going to separate organizations. And as we've seen, CEOs understand this. CEO suites really do understand this. We finally have a seat at the table. Mm-hmm. Now, will everybody choose to sit there? Maybe not every single one of us, but 10 years from now, I think we'll look back on this moment as the point where all of our jobs changed with a vendor investment community that's willing to facilitate that change.
I'll add one more thing there, sorry. I'll be quick. Okay. It's the CEOs understand this, but I think there's a lot of organizational fear to actually be measuring the value of these investments, right? And what I will say is, coming back to the golden age that we're going to herald, right? It's people who can get over that fear and actually embrace the ROI and be comfortable, even if some of your decisions actually don't have ROI and you fail, but then you get to solutions that eventually have ROI, that is going to, in a 10-year horizon, serve you in much better stead than trying to fight and be afraid of measuring ROI. And I think that'll separate, I would say, the L&D professionals and the organizations that end up succeeding versus not, is who can overcome that fear.
It's such a great point.
I think,
go ahead, Christina.
Sorry. I think there's a huge opportunity to look at the ROI challenge through a much more human lens, through the lens of all these different stakeholders that we're trying to serve. So not just the learners and the business leaders, but also the instructional designers and the program administrators. So take something that's often overlooked, like instructional design agility. This is like the ability to take a program with these new platforms and tools, roll it out, get feedback, incorporate that feedback, compress cycles of development, getting better and better, faster and faster over time, creating a virtuous cycle where you're driving more engagement, more mastery, and more productivity. There's a huge opportunity there to create transformational, not just incremental results. And that's just one stakeholder. So ultimately, I think the real power of learning is not just the ability to serve all these different stakeholders at once, but actually use learning to actively align them together through these new planes of data and visibility. I think we're headed in a direction as an industry that's much more community driven and data rich. I kind of think that we're where marketing was maybe 10, 15 years ago, before all these new tools like HubSpot and Marketo ushered in a new era of data-driven thinking, of full cycle attribution, and really understanding the performance of every element in the ecosystem. So I think we're headed towards an era of more precision and more granularity, and I think it's going to be massively networked and super exciting. And actually what's daunting is the abundance and the richness and not any sort of scarcity.
I love that. I think what you're saying is, or what I'm taking away from that, I should say, is if you are an L&D professional who is fearing ROI and data, or an organization that's fearing ROI and learning, you're akin to the marketer who didn't embrace data like 10 years ago.
Yep.
And look at where you end up.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that as well. If I could just add one thing and then give it back to you. You know, it gets to how things are changing and how fast they are. And we always say the roles of the L&D professionals are changing as well, where we're giving them the tools to micro-monitor but not micromanage, right? Where they can actually help people curate their right learning, help them go where they need to be. And it shifts the conversation, and you see it in the data, right? LinkedIn Learning came out with their big report last week, and 80% of L&D professionals said they're asked to be strategic partners now. Something like 70% said their budgets had gone up. So if we think about ROI and we think about L&D as not doing as well as they could have, they're going through a transformation. And things like ByteDance are actually a fact that, hey, there's a closer eye on this right now. And so you're getting sharper. To your point, Gautam, that helps us long term. And that helps us elevate ourselves as a function long term. It helps us elevate our clients as a function.
When you have a seat at the table, the accountability comes with it.
Amen to that, right? Like, it's about time we have a seat at that table and we're strategic partners. We're not just trying to find the right book to give somebody.
This is all really interesting. It makes me think about the idea of fear, because all this is really scary. Everybody's dealing with a lot of change, and the world is evolving at an exponential pace, and L&D is not immune to that, right? So what's stopping us, to go back to one of my previous questions, what's stopping us from finally doing a better job and demonstrating an ROI and using measurement, not vanity metrics, but metrics that matter, et cetera? And I almost wonder if fear is at the heart of it, because like you were saying, Gautam, if L&D practitioners start saying, well, we're going to actually measure some other stuff. Well, what happens if those metrics show that they're not getting the results with that coaching program that they, or whatever? Not to, single out coaching, it could be anything. What if the metrics don't reflect the story that they wanted to tell? That's scary. That's really scary.
But wouldn't you rather know? Like, it's like going to the doctor and say, I don't want to see the results.
Completely. You would not want to go to the doctor and just not want to know, right? If you've got a medical condition. So I think it's a good analogy. And to your point as well, Christina, I think there's a lot that we can learn with marketing. Marketing would never dream of just making assumptions and throwing things at people. No, they're constantly using the data-driven, right? They're monitoring all the habits of consumers. What they're clicking on, and then it shows up on the website that you visit next, that red dress that you wanted to buy, right? So we can also use data to gather insights and not make assumptions as well about what people want, and maybe about what to uncover underlying needs as well in our learners, perhaps. Interesting.
There's a lot of excitement for it. Personally, I know a lot of the people here are self-selected, right? And we are all here because we want to be on the innovation side. But personally, I feel a lot less fear. I feel a lot more excitement, like Gautam is saying, of like, hey, if there's an eye on it, that means it matters. And if it matters, that means there's space for it. And if there's space for it, that means there's budget for it. And that means we can actually make change and actually drive things. And so like, I love what you all are doing in the consulting world where you're actually integrating L&D into transformations. I think there's a lot of excitement for this.
Yeah, and I think just like building on that, as we looked at the most successful kind of change program, actually to apply some of the latest kind of thinking on Agile and Scrum and all that cross-functional team, we do see when we, for example, help coach a client on installing cross-functional teams, you should always have someone who is doing L&D as part of the team, right? So if you think about it, working with one of the largest retailers, yes, you're designing a new store experience, but someone needs to be ready to train the storefront people on how to interact with the customer. So why do that at the back end when, as you're designing the solution, you should already be thinking about how to enable your frontline workers. So in the same way where we ask companies to work in cross-functional teams, where I'll have your supply chain, have your, like marketing people all work in one team, in the same way, L&D should actually also be just part of the business. It's one of the many skills that are needed to deliver the solution, to deliver the customer results. So I do see that as one of the ways to make sure the ROI is measured, and it's directly measured, it's directly connected to the business outcomes.
It also makes me think, at the end of the day, getting this right, it's the difference between those people, not learners, or just people, staying relevant or becoming redundant. And guess what? The same is true for the organizations that employ them, because this is all about innovation, and people are the driver of that, right? So something that clearly I'm passionate about. So I'm wondering, to kind of open this up again to the group, what is one piece of advice that you would give primarily to the edtech vendors that are building solutions and they're trying to sell them into these companies? What can they do to try to help move that needle and do a better job when it comes to achieving ROI? Oh, Christina?
I was going to say, I think our industry is really good at coming up with learning objectives. Why don't we start coming up with ROI objectives? Start working backwards from the goal. What attitudes are we looking for? What learning, what measurable learning are we looking for? What application objectives? What business impact objectives? And what ROI objectives? So working backwards from the end result. It's a kind of thinking that we use in other areas of business, and I think we can transfer some of that acumen to learning.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll share the one piece of advice, and I'll just contextualize it as to, something you said, Amanda, just really resonated, which was, this is about people, and this is about people not becoming redundant. All of us in this room, whether it's L&D professionals, whether it's all of us as people providing these services, have a responsibility to these people to not become redundant in 10 or 20 years. That's why we are doing the work we are doing. That's a big responsibility, and that's a big enough motivator for us to get over the fear. And with that, like, my advice to get over the fear is, like, and I think this is really summarizing what every single one of you has said in some way or form, is pick one simple question. Like, every time you're putting in place a program, you're investing, 6 figures, 7 figures in a program, spend an hour at the start of it, maybe whether you're a vendor, whether you're an L&D professional, you sit down together and say, what's one question we're going to ask? So for example, like, one thing we found really impactful at Springboard is just to ask the managers at the end of the program a simple question that you work with, with the company on. For example, if there's learning objective, did the person get better at this objective? And the other thing we found really helpful is bringing in projects into the program itself and just measure the value of the program. But those are examples. The point is, you find one simple question that you can ask before and after the program and just measure on that.
And definitely measure the baseline, right?
Yeah.
But what if the customer in this case, they say, I don't care. I've got my RFP. I spent months putting together this RFP. I just want to tick the boxes on my RFP. And my manager said that this is how we're going to be measured for success. What do you do with that?
Everybody
Never
wants,
happens, right?
Everybody wants to be the hero, and I think vendors have the opportunity to elevate the sponsors that we work with to that hero status. And I'll give you a sense of how we've addressed this internally inside of Modal. For those who don't know, we provide cohort-based learning for enterprises to learn tech skills. So data analysis, data science, web development, so on and so forth. And I would say we early on in product development try to go towards this universal one ROI to rule it all, we went very much down to, nope, you know what? Our job and every one of our experiences is to build specific skills. We're going to measure those specific skills. And even if the sponsor didn't necessarily ask for it, we're going to give them reporting and analytics at the end. Where did somebody start? Where did they get to on those specific skills? And so my advice to vendors out there is, this is actually very specific. Your investors will almost certainly drive you towards more universal solutions. Give me something that's scalable. Give me something that can scale across millions of users, across thousands of topics. And my advice to you at the early stage, mid stage, and even late stage is to stay specific. Stay specific to the use cases that matter to your customers. Measure it, report on it. You'll figure out a way to scale it. But beware the siren song of universality that sometimes some venture folks will advise vendors to pursue.
I hope the investors are listening too, because that's a really great point, Darren. More advice, particularly for the vendors, but hey, if there's advice for the investors, I'm sure they'd love to listen.
I guess the one thing I'd say, and I see the clock hitting 0, and I want to give Jennie time too. So the one thing I would say is also listen to your learners, right? Sometimes we forget that we have adult learners, and we try to over-choreograph things, and we try to over-choreograph what we put them through and say, you have to do A, B, C, D, E, and F. We work with executives on a regular basis, right? We do the leadership development programs for executives of public companies. And sometimes they know what they need even more than I know what they need as the head of product. And so leave space for them and then listen to them about what they need to learn. It's a simple thing, but I know there's been times where I've forgotten it.
Jennie?
I think for me is having interviewed or been pitched to by a lot of technology vendors, I think for me is just like, keep it really simple. I feel like there's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of like technology and fancy videos and clicks, but it's like, can you boil it down to what does this actually do? Like, what does it actually do? Because I think for a lot of people, especially executives who are buying this experience for the first time, they just need to understand in the most simplest term, like, what does it do?
Great, so I'm hearing some common themes. Don't boil the ocean. Start with some specific use cases, right? Help your customers understand where to begin, right? And focus on those metrics that do matter so that hopefully we can change this for once and for all, and maybe next year we won't have to come back. I don't know. We'll be talking about something else. So I think that's all we've got. Our time is up. This is the last session of the day, though, so if you're not going to happy hour and if anyone has a question, I'm sure we can hang out for a couple of minutes more.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.